The first thing I noticed about the funeral home wasn't the smell of lilies. It was how quiet the air was, as if even time had stopped to pay its respects. I stood in the doorway longer than I should have, clutching my portfolio folder like it was a shield. The place looked like something between a cathedral and a library. Dark wood panels, tall arched, windows with muted stained glass, and candles flickering even though it was broad daylight. There was no dust, no cobwebs, no creepy pipe organ, just stillness so deep it made my own breathing sound disrespectful. And here I was, Mara, 29 years old, painter turned temp worker, about to beg for a part-time job at a funeral home. If irony had a face, it would be mine right then. I'd told myself this was temporary. Rent had to be paid, and paintbrushes didn't buy themselves. And yet, as my boots clicked on the polished floor, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a place that wasn't meant for the living. Miss West. The voice was smooth, low, and so startlingly close that I jumped. He was already there, tall, sharp lines in a tailored black suit, like someone had sketched him with a fountain pen, and then shaded him in with obsidian ink. His hair was dark, his tie even darker, and his eyes, they weren't just looking at me, they were studying me, as though every movement I made translated into some hidden language only he understood. "Yes?" I said, my voice embarrassingly squeaky. I'm here about the job?" "Of course." He inclined his head slightly, a gesture that was both old-fashioned and precise. "I'm Silvan, director of the home. Please, come in." Director, not owner, not manager. Director, like he was conducting grief as if it were a symphony. He led me down a narrow corridor, the smell of candles and lilies following us. We passed closed doors, and each one gave me the same chill as walking past. Someone asleep. You knew they were there even if you couldn't hear them. My palms sweated, and I thought, not for the first time, even in hell, the HR departments probably look more welcoming than this. We stopped in a side office. Dark desk, leather chairs, a single lamp throwing a warm circle of light over papers stacked with military precision. He gestured for me to sit. "So," he said, folding his hands together. "Why here?" I could have lied. Said I'd always been fascinated by mortuary sciences, or whatever phrase people use to make death sound academic. Instead, I went with honesty. Or maybe stupidity. "I need money," I blurted. "And I figured you wouldn't mind hiring someone who doesn't talk much." The corner of his mouth twitched, as if he almost smiled but thought better of it. "Honesty is refreshing." There was a silence. Not the awkward kind, the kind where you realize the other person doesn't actually need to speak to make you feel exposed. And then, movement. From the corner of the room, on a small pedestal, I noticed a brooch. Old-fashioned, delicate, silver shaped into a crescent moon. Silvan reached out and touched it with his gloved hand. For a heartbeat, the air shifted. A faint glow, soft, golden, bloomed around the brooch, and I swear I heard something. A woman's laugh, distant, like an echo carried down a hallway I couldn't see. My skin prickled. I blinked. The glow faded. The sound was gone. Silvan's hand withdrew, calm, as though nothing had happened. What was that?" My voice cracked, halfway between awe and terror. He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at me with those impossible eyes, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he might say something absurd like you imagined it. Instead, he spoke evenly. "That belonged to Mrs. Ashworth. She passed last week." I swallowed. "And the glow?" Another pause. His gaze sharpened, like a scalpel resting on the skin. "Memories," he said finally. "They linger. Sometimes they need to be tended." My throat went dry. Memories. He tends memories. Who even says things like that? Any sane person would have run, but my feet stayed rooted to the polished wood floor, and instead of bolting, I found myself blurting out, "Do they talk back?" That time, his mouth did twitch into the ghost of a smile. "Only if you're listening." The silence settled back in, heavy and strange. I thought of my own memories, the ones I'd tried to bury under paint and cheap coffee, the ones that still woke me at night. And for reasons I couldn't explain, sitting there in that too-quiet office, I didn't feel like fleeing. I felt like I'd already crossed a line. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted to see what waited on the other side. The staff kitchen was about the size of a walk-in closet. A battered coffee machine hummed on the counter, leaking the faint smell of burnt beans into the air. On the walls hung framed photographs, smiling faces of people who were clearly no longer alive, the kind of detail you notice only after the second or third glance. When your stomach drops and you realize every picture is a before. I sat at the tiny table, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug that had "World's Best Employee" fading across the porcelain. The irony was a little too sharp. Silvan stood across from me, pouring his own cup with unnerving precision. No spill, no wasted movement. He could have been pouring poison, and it would have looked elegant. I cleared my throat. So, what exactly did I see back there? He didn't look at me as he stirred his coffee, black as ink. You saw what you thought you saw. That's not an answer. Finally, his gaze lifted. Those eyes again, like they'd memorized me already. I tend memories of the dead. It is my duty to preserve what they leave behind. I blinked at him. That's it? You say it like you're telling me you file taxes on the side. He sipped his coffee. Filing taxes doesn't usually terrify people. Depends on the person, I muttered. I nearly fainted last year. The corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but something close. I leaned back in my chair, trying to ignore the goosebumps still running up my arms. So, you're like a walking antique with a side hustle in tragedy? His brow arched. If that's your attempt at humor, Miss West, it is both unrefined and strangely accurate. Well, I'm a painter. Accuracy isn't usually my thing. He studied me for a beat too long, then set his cup down with a quiet click. You've seen more than most ever do. You could walk out that door now, forget this place, and never speak of it again. The way he said it made the air heavier, like it wasn't just a suggestion, it was an invitation to escape. I should have taken it. I should have said thank you and left. Instead, I clutched the mug tighter and shrugged. I need money, and frankly, I'm too nosy to quit after day one. Who else gets a demon boss with decent tailoring? That earned me a full silence. Not hostile, but weighted. Then, at last, his reply, "You have a curious nature. It will get you killed someday. Or employed," I shot back. Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, maybe, though so brief it could have been a trick of the fluorescent lights. We sat there, two strangers sipping terrible coffee in a kitchen, plastered with dead people's smiles. And for the first time since stepping into the funeral home, I felt the tiniest spark of something unexpected. Not comfort, not safety, something more dangerous. Curiosity. The funeral hall looked like a stage waiting for its play to begin. Rows of polished wooden chairs lined up in perfect symmetry, white lilies and roses, crowding every corner, their scent thick enough to cling to the back of my throat. Tall candles burned steadily, flames unmoving despite the draft that crept under the heavy doors. I carried a stack of folded programs in my arms, trying not to drop them. My first assignment, and I was already sweating like I'd been asked to perform brain surgery. Left side, Silvan's voice came from behind me. Calm, measured, the kind of tone that didn't need to rise above a whisper to command attention. Place them on every other seat. I obeyed, glancing over my shoulder as he adjusted the flowers near the casket. He worked with such deliberate care it was unnerving. This wasn't just arranging petals. It was as if each stem carried weight, meaning I couldn't decipher. By the time the mourners arrived, I'd already rehearsed 10 different escape routes. They shuffled in quietly, faces drawn, shoulders bent under invisible burdens. Watching them, I realized I had no idea how to stand, where to look, or even how to breathe without feeling intrusive. I hovered at the back as Silvan greeted the family. He didn't smile, not exactly, but his presence softened something in the air. One by one, people seemed to exhale near him, as though simply being acknowledged allowed them to let go of a fraction of their grief. It was disconcerting. When the service began, I stationed myself by the wall, clutching a candle lighter like a nervous stagehand. The family spoke about the deceased, small anecdotes, simple details. A favorite song, a love of gardening, the way she laughed at her own bad jokes. Their words filled the silence until it became something alive, something heavy. I glanced at Silvan. He was listening with absolute attention, not a flicker of distraction. When the eldest son faltered mid-sentence, Silvan inclined his head gently, as though silently urging him on. Later, when the last guest had drifted out and the hall was quiet again, I found him extinguishing the candles one by one. "You listen differently," I said before I could stop myself. He paused, the last flame still swaying. "Grief is not only loss," he said, voice low. "It is proof that someone lived. Every tear, every story, it is a thread woven into existence. My task is to guard those threads." The candle went dark, smoke curling between us. I swallowed. "That's heavier than any job description I've ever had." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence carried the weight. And then, something strange. As I collected the discarded programs, my hand brushed the back of a chair. For the briefest moment, the air shifted. A flicker of color, like paint bleeding through water. Suddenly I wasn't in the hall. I was in a sunlit garden. A woman knelt by a row of daisies, humming softly, dirt on her hands. The image was so vivid I could smell the earth, feel the warmth on my skin. I gasped, stumbling back. The vision dissolved, leaving me clutching the chair as if it might keep me upright. Silvan was watching me. Not startled, not confused, just watching, as if he'd been waiting for this. What was that?" My voice cracked, half whisper, half demand. "You tell me," he said. I shook my head, heart racing. "I don't know. I saw something. Someone. The woman in the garden was that her memory," he said quietly. "But not mine to touch." The implication hit me like a chill. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't normal. Not even in this place. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, because I couldn't think of anything else to do, I muttered, "Great. First week on the job and I'm already hallucinating." To my surprise, the faintest glimmer of amusement passed over his face. "Perhaps you're listening more than you realize." I wanted to argue, to insist that I wasn't one of them, whoever they were. But the memory of that sunlit garden clung to me, stubborn and comforting. For the first time since stepping into the funeral home, the quiet didn't feel suffocating. It felt, almost, like hope. The evening air carried the crisp bite of autumn, and the cemetery felt like a place suspended between silence and memory. Old headstones leaned at odd angles, some so weathered their names were half erased. Lanterns lit the winding path, their glow spilling gold against stone angels and rustling trees. "This way," Silvan said, walking with the steady grace of someone who belonged here far more than I did. I trailed behind, hugging my coat tighter. You know, most bosses take their employees to coffee shops, maybe a team-building seminar, not this. His profile was sharp in the lamplight, his gaze moving across the graves as though he were reading them like a familiar book. "This is a seminar," he said softly. "In history, in memory. Every stone is a chapter." I rolled my eyes, though a smile tugged at the corner of my lips. "Sure. Nothing like a brisk stroll through eternal rest to build morale." He stopped in front of a leaning cross-shaped marker, his gloved hand brushing the moss. "Here lies Mr. Alden. He cheated every card game he played, yet at his funeral, his widow swore he was the most honest man she'd ever met." Two truths held at once, neither erasing the other. "Sounds like my ex," I muttered before I could stop myself. For the first time, his gaze flicked toward me, curious, almost amused. Then he gestured farther down the path. "And here, Miss Evelyn Carr. She demanded champagne at her burial, so the mourners toasted her over the open grave. It was messy. I pictured solemn black suits juggling crystal flutes and almost snorted. "Please tell me someone dropped the bottle." A pause. Then, to my astonishment, he inclined his head. 3, in fact. That did it. A laugh burst out of me, sharp and bright against the still air. It startled me as much as it seemed to startle him. I hadn't heard myself laugh like that in years. The sound hung between us, echoing faintly among the stones. Silvan froze, his expression unreadable, except for the faint widening of his eyes. He looked at me as if I'd just spoken a language long forgotten to him. I pressed a hand over my mouth. "Sorry. I didn't mean..." "Don't apologize." His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it, almost reverent. "It suits you." Something in my chest fluttered, dangerous and unfamiliar. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was fragile, tender, as if we might shatter it with the wrong word. We walked on, slower now. I found myself stealing glances at him under the lantern glow. The demon director of a funeral home, captivated by a laugh. And me? Suddenly less afraid, suddenly aware of how close our footsteps had become. For the first time since starting this job, the cemetery didn't feel like a place of endings. It felt like the beginning of something I couldn't name. The office felt different at night. The lamp on Silvan's desk threw a golden circle of light, leaving the corners of the room swallowed by shadow. The air smelled faintly of extinguished candles, and outside, rain ticked softly against the windows. I sat on the edge of a chair, staring at my phone screen, my stomach dropping lower with every headline. Local funeral home exposed. Family's stories leaked. Beneath it, quotes. We trusted them with our grief, and names I recognized from the programs I'd handed out just days ago. The article was detailed. Too detailed. Almost word for word from the notes I'd jotted down while helping families prepare for services. Their memories, their private anecdotes. They'd been sold to the press. The sound of the office door closing made me flinch. Silvan walked in, coat damp from the rain, his expression colder than the storm outside. He set the newspaper on the desk. Same headline. Same betrayal. His eyes, when they lifted to mine, were sharp as knives. "You had access." I froze. "You think I gave you entry into lives that were not yours to touch," he said, his voice quiet, but the kind of quiet that cuts deeper than shouting. "And now they are paraded in print. You sold them?" The accusation burned hotter than embarrassment. It was insult. I shot to my feet. "Are you serious? You think I'd trade someone's grief for a paycheck? That I'd, scribble notes during funerals and run them off to the tabloids like a part-time spy?" His stare didn't falter. It would not be the first time humans turned sorrow into currency. My chest tightened, anger sparking. Wow. That's what you think of me? That I'm just another greedy human who can't be trusted? The shadows seemed to bend closer around him, the lamplight glancing off the hard angles of his face. "You were the only variable that changed," he said. I laughed bitterly, though it cracked at the edges. "You really don't know people, do you? Trust me, if I wanted to cash in on secrets, there are easier ways than haunting a funeral home with Mr. Eternal Iceberg." For a heartbeat, silence. The clock ticked. Rain tapped harder against the glass. Then he leaned forward, hands braced on the desk, and his voice dropped to something nearly human. "I gave you trust, more than I give most, and it is already in question." The words stung worse than the accusation, because underneath the ice I heard it. The possibility that he had begun to believe in me, even if just a fraction. And now, he didn't. I swallowed hard, blinking back a burn that wasn't anger anymore. "You're too quick to believe the worst, Silvan. Maybe it's easier for you. Demons, grief, tragedy. That's your whole language, isn't it? But some of us still know what loyalty looks like." My voice cracked on the last word, and I hated it. His gaze softened. Not much, just the faintest shift, but he didn't retract the accusation, and that hurt more than if he'd shouted at me. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair. You want a traitor? Look somewhere else. But if you keep looking at me like I'm the enemy, you'll make sure I become one." The door slammed harder than I intended as I stormed into the hall. For a long moment, I leaned against the wall outside the office, chest heaving, trying not to crumble. The warmth from the laugh we'd shared in the cemetery felt miles away, replaced by the cold sting of suspicion. Somewhere in the dark, the trust we'd begun to build cracked, and I wasn't sure it could be pieced back together. The cafe across from the funeral home was bright in a way that felt almost hostile. Neon menus flickered, espresso machines hissed, and the chatter of students mixed with the clatter of dishes. It was the kind of place where life was too loud, where people pretended the shadows outside didn't exist. I stirred my coffee, watching the cream swirl into shapes that refused to settle. Across from me sat Daniel, my older brother, always impeccably dressed, always polished, like the world was a business deal waiting to be closed. "You've lasted longer there than I thought you would," he said, sipping his latte, with a kind of self-satisfaction that made me want to hurl my mug at his head. "But come on, Mara. A funeral home? That's not you." I tightened my grip on the spoon. "You don't get to decide what's me. I don't have to decide. I can see it." He leaned in, voice low, persuasive. "That place is bleeding money. Old property, no real future. But the land? It's worth something. Developers would pay millions for it. You could get out, start fresh. Stop hiding in other people's tragedies." The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. Hiding in other people's tragedies. Was that what I was doing? Daniel's eyes narrowed, catching the flicker of hesitation on my face. "Think about it. You've been drifting for years. You're too smart to settle for candle wax and coffins." I bristled. "It's not coffins. It's people. Families. Memories." "Memories don't pay rent," he shot back. I hated how practiced he was. Every word a scalpel, cutting straight to the softest places. He was offering me an escape, neatly wrapped in cynicism. And, for a second, I almost wanted to take it. The bell above the cafe door jingled. My breath caught before I even turned. Silvan. He stood in the doorway, black coat still damp from the drizzle outside. His eyes swept the cafe, sharp as blades, and landed on Daniel, and then on me. The air shifted instantly, like two storms colliding. Daniel glanced over his shoulder, frowning. "That him? Your boss?" Silvan approached, every step deliberate. He didn't look at me. His gaze pinned Daniel in place. "And you are?" "Her brother," Daniel said smoothly, extending a hand. "Daniel West." Silvan didn't take it. "You've been discussing business." The tension in his tone made my chest clench. It wasn't just disapproval. It was something colder, something that bordered on hostility. Daniel chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "I was reminding my sister she deserves better than working in, well, whatever this is." He gestured vaguely toward the funeral home outside the window. "She could have a life. Real security." Silvan's expression didn't change, but the shadows seemed to lean closer to him, as if the room itself bent around his disapproval. "She already has a life. And security," Daniel smirked. "Funny. That's not what it looks like from where I'm standing." "Then perhaps," Silvan said, voice like a blade sliding free, "you should stand somewhere else." The silence between them was so sharp I could barely breathe. I slammed my spoon onto the saucer, the clatter snapping both their gazes to me. "Enough. I'm not a piece of property you can haggle over. Not land, not a business. Not something to be sold or guarded." My brother's smirk faltered, but only slightly. "Mara, I'll think about what you said," I cut him off, pushing back from the table. My hands shook, whether from anger or fear, I wasn't sure. As I stood, Silvan's eyes finally met mine. There was something dangerous there, something I didn't want to name. It wasn't just anger at Daniel, it was fear. And beneath that, jealousy. For the first time, I realized how tangled I was becoming in all of this. Family on one side, a demon on the other, and me, stuck in the middle, trying to decide which betrayal would hurt more. The storm outside rattled the windows, rain streaking down the glass in frantic lines. Thunder rolled overhead, a low growl that seemed to echo inside Silvan's office. The lamp on his desk cast long shadows against the walls, bending the room into something darker, sharper. The old man sat across from him, hunched but unyielding, his cane tapping against the floor with each word. "You meddle," he accused, his voice trembling not with weakness, but fury. "You tamper with what isn't yours. You make people believe what you want them to believe. Memories twisted until they fit your story." I stood just inside the doorway, frozen. The air was so thick with tension it felt alive. Silvan, seated with his back straight and hands folded, didn't move at first. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone. "I do not create memories," he said at last, his tone calm but cutting. "I preserve them. What they bring is what was already there." The old man slammed his cane against the floor. "Liar. My wife died remembering joy she didn't have. You painted over her pain. You made me believe she was happy." His voice cracked, and in that crack was grief so raw it made my throat ache. Silvan's gaze hardened. He rose from his chair, and the air shifted, colder, heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. "Would you rather she left you with bitterness? With regret?" The shadows around him seemed to stretch, long fingers reaching toward the walls. His eyes caught the lamplight and held it too long, like they weren't reflecting light but consuming it. I felt my pulse hammer in my throat. This wasn't the composed, elegant director I'd come to know. This was something older, something dangerous. The old man recoiled, knuckles white around his cane. "You play God," he spat. Silvan's voice dropped, low and resonant, vibrating in my bones. "No, I play nothing. I hold what is left, and sometimes it is kinder to show the light than the darkness." For a moment, the storm outside seemed to still. Silence swallowed the office, broken only by the ragged breathing of the old man. I couldn't stand it anymore. My voice came out sharper than I intended. "Stop it. He's grieving. You're scaring him." Both men turned toward me, one in shock, the other in quiet fury. My legs trembled, but I forced myself to meet Silvan's gaze. "You're not helping. You're proving him right. You don't twist memories, fine. But right now you look like exactly what he thinks you are." The tension stretched, taut and unbearable. Then, slowly, the shadows receded. Silvan straightened, his face settling back into its usual control, though his eyes still burned. The old man clutched his cane, muttered something under his breath, and shuffled toward the door. He didn't look back at either of us. When the door clicked shut, the office felt emptier than before. I turned to Silvan, heart still racing. "Whatever that was, don't do it again. Not around me." His gaze lingered on me, unreadable. For a heartbeat, I thought he might lash out, deny, or dismiss me. Instead, he said quietly, "And yet you stayed." I hated how true it was. The rain had stopped by the time Silvan asked me to follow him. The storm left the world washed clean, the air outside his office sharp with damp earth and silence. He didn't explain where we were going, only said, "There's something you should see." We descended a narrow staircase behind a door I'd never noticed before. The steps groaned under our weight, spiraling down into the belly of the building. At the bottom, he unlocked another door. Iron-bound, old, the kind of door you'd expect to keep secrets in and intruders out. The room beyond was dim, bathed in a faint golden glow that seemed to breathe. Shelves lined every wall, stacked with objects, rings, letters, photographs, scarves, toys, even chipped mugs and rusted keys. Ordinary things that hummed with something extraordinary. I stepped inside, the air buzzing faintly against my skin. What is this place? Silvan closed the door behind us, his voice quiet, almost reverent. The memory room. Every family leaves behind tokens of their dead. Some choose to forget, but others cannot. I keep them here. They speak. I walked slowly, running my eyes over the shelves. The objects didn't just sit there, they watched. I could feel them pressing at me, brushing against my thoughts, as though each one carried its own heartbeat. Silvan stopped beside a wooden music box, its paint peeling but the carved lid delicate. He lifted it with care, brushing away invisible dust. Each of these holds echoes. What remains of laughter, of sorrow. They are what I protect. I studied his face in the dim light. For once, the perfect composure slipped, and I saw something raw. Loneliness, maybe. Or hunger. "Why you?" I asked softly. His gaze lingered on the box, but his words were distant. "I do not know. I was not always like this. Before, there was a life. But I no longer remember it, only the lives of others, only what they leave." It hit me like a weight I hadn't expected. He lived surrounded by echoes, yet had no past of his own. A demon, yes, but also something hollow, filled only with borrowed voices. I swallowed, my throat tight. "That sounds unbearable." "Sometimes," he admitted, "but sometimes it is enough." I reached for the shelf without thinking, my fingers brushing against a faded photograph of a young girl holding a puppy. The moment my skin touched it, the air split open. Suddenly I wasn't in the room anymore. I was on a sunlit porch, the puppy wriggling in the girl's arms, her laughter high and bright. The memory rushed through me with color, warmth, joy, sunlight spilling like paint across a canvas. I gasped, pulling back. The photograph trembled faintly in its frame, glowing with a brightness that hadn't been there before. Silvan's eyes widened. He stepped closer, his voice low, astonished. "You changed it." "I didn't." My chest heaved, my hand still tingling. "I just touched it." He stared at the glowing photograph, then at me. "You gave it light." The words sent a shiver through me. My knees wobbled, and I pressed back against the shelf, laughing shakily as tears welled up. Great. So now I'm a glorified night lamp for dead people's memories? It was supposed to be a joke, but my laugh cracked halfway, slipping into something closer to a sob. The mix of grief and wonder was too much, my own past colliding with these borrowed fragments. And then, to my shock, I heard him laugh. Not cold, not mocking. A small, rough sound, as though he hadn't remembered how in centuries. I froze, staring. He looked younger in that moment, almost human, his eyes softened by something I'd never seen before. The silence stretched, charged and fragile. I wiped at my cheeks, still laughing through tears. "Don't look at me like that." "Like what?" His voice was low, careful. "Like I trailed off, unable to finish. He stepped closer, the golden glow painting his features. His hand hovered near mine, not touching, just close enough that I felt the warmth of it. "Like you are more alive than anyone I've ever known?" The words unraveled something inside me. My heart hammered so hard I was sure he could hear it. I should have pulled back. I should have run. Instead, I leaned in. And when his lips brushed mine, it wasn't fire or thunder. It was quiet. A gentle breaking, like dawn slipping into night. His mouth tasted faintly of coffee and rain, his hand finally resting against mine as if anchoring us both. I laughed again, soft and shaky, even as tears slid down my cheeks. He kissed the sound from me, holding it like it was a treasure. For the first time, the memory room didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a beginning. Chaos had settled over the funeral home like a second storm. The lobby, once so carefully quiet, buzzed with tension. Clients whispered in sharp tones, some demanding refunds, others wanting to take back the keepsakes they had entrusted to Silvan. A reporter loitered outside the iron gates with a camera crew, shouting questions that cut through the rain-soaked air, and at the center of it all stood Silvan, silent, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't raise his voice, didn't try to fight the tide. He simply watched as the place he had built unraveled thread by thread. I cornered him in his office, the sound of the commotion outside pressing in through the walls. "You're just letting it happen?" My voice cracked with disbelief. "You're not even trying to stop it." He looked up from the documents spread across his desk. His face was carved in ice. "The damage is done. The trust is broken. Better to end it cleanly than drag it through the mud. End it. I nearly laughed, the sound bitter. You're talking about closing, shutting down, just like that? He inclined his head. Yes. Something in me snapped. You coward. His eyes narrowed. Dangerous. Careful. No, I shot back, stepping closer. You think you're so strong, so eternal, but this is weakness. You're running away the second things get hard. You'd rather bury the whole place than fight for it. He stood then, tall and terrible, the air around him tightening. And you would rather cling to illusions. You think loyalty, honesty, hope, they are shields. They are not. They are knives you hand to others and wait to be stabbed with. My chest heaved, rage and hurt colliding. You don't get it, do you? Not everything is a trap. Not everyone is out to betray you. You keep talking about preserving memories, but you won't even make one of your own. His voice thundered, low and vibrating in my bones. Naive. You speak of life as if it cannot be ripped from you in an instant, as if grief does not prove you wrong every day. I stared at him, breath shallow. For a moment, all I saw was the demon, not the man who had walked me through, the cemetery, not the one who had kissed me in the memory room. Just the hollow thing convinced nothing was worth saving. Maybe you're right, I whispered, my throat burning. Maybe I am naive. But at least I still believe in something. At least I still try. Silvan didn't answer. He only looked at me with that same cold finality, the kind that ends conversations, ends possibilities, ends everything. So I turned. My footsteps echoed in the hall, each one heavier than the last. I didn't look back, not even when the rain-soaked lobby doors slammed behind me. The funeral home was supposed to be about endings, but I hadn't expected ours to come so soon. The funeral hall looked nothing like the one I remembered from my first day. The candles were gone, the flowers wilted, and the air carried a damp chill that seeped into my bones. Rows of chairs stood empty, like sentinels abandoned on a battlefield. It was a place meant for memory, but tonight it felt more like a tomb for silence itself. I sat in the back row, staring at the casket platform. In my mind, I saw not a stranger, but the face of the one I'd lost, the smile I used to paint in. Brighter colors than it ever truly was, the laugh that still echoed when I least expected it. I'd run once before, after the funeral, after the dirt swallowed the last piece of someone I loved. I'd run from the grief, from the pain, from myself. But here, in this place that reeked of endings, I finally understood. Running hadn't saved me. It had only made the absence louder. I couldn't run again. Not from them. Not from him. The sound of voices pulled me out of my thoughts. The side doors opened, and clients trickled in. Faces I recognized, etched with disappointment and suspicion. Some carried boxes, ready to reclaim the tokens they had left with Silvan. Others whispered angrily, glancing around the empty hall as if expecting vultures to descend. At the front of the room, Silvan stood rigid, his expression carved from stone. He looked every inch the demon tonight. Tall, composed, terrifyingly still. He didn't speak, didn't try to stop them. And that was the moment I realized, if he wouldn't fight for this place, then I would. I rose, my knees trembling, and walked down the aisle. The whispers swelled, confusion following me like a tide. When I reached the front, I turned to face them. I know you don't trust this place right now, I began, my voice shaking. And maybe you shouldn't. The press has torn it apart. Rumors have made it look rotten. And yes, mistakes were made. The words stung my throat, but I kept going. I'm not here to deny your grief or to excuse what's happened. I'm here because I've seen what this place can do. I've seen how your stories, your memories, don't just fade into the dark. They matter. A hush fell over the hall. Even Silvan's head tilted slightly toward me, his eyes unreadable. We can't change death, I said, stronger now. We can't bargain with it or bribe it or pretend it doesn't hurt, but we can hold on to what made us live. The laughter, the love, the little pieces of joy that stay behind. That's what this place is for. Not coffins, not headlines, but you. Your lives. Your memories. Someone in the second row let out a shaky breath. A woman clutched her husband's hand tighter. I swallowed hard, my chest tight, but lighter somehow. You can take your tokens back if you want. No one will stop you. But if you leave them here, I promise, they'll be kept safe. Honored. Not just by him. I glanced at Silvan, whose eyes locked on mine, burning with something I couldn't name, but by me too. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, one man sat back down. A woman lowered the box she carried. A ripple passed through the crowd, not loud, not certain, but enough. People stayed. The storm outside had quieted. In its place was a stillness that didn't feel empty anymore. It felt whole. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was drowning in someone else's grief. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. And when I dared to look at Silvan again, his expression had changed. The cold director's mask was gone. In its place was something softer, almost fragile. Hope. The office felt different that night. The lamp's glow was warmer than usual, its light spilling softly across the desk instead of carving sharp shadows into the walls. The storm had passed, leaving the air heavy with that strange, clean silence that follows chaos. For once, the silence didn't suffocate me. Silvan stood near the shelves, his coat draped neatly over the chair, the dark lines of his suit softened by the light. He didn't look like a demon tonight. He looked like a man weighed down by something he hadn't yet named. When I closed the door behind me, he turned. They stayed? I nodded. Not because of you. The corner of his mouth twitched, but he didn't take offense. Because of you. I let out a shaky breath, my arms crossing against my chest, more to keep from trembling than from defiance. I don't know what I did. I just spoke. You gave them what I cannot, he said, his gaze steady, his voice low. Light? My throat tightened. The memory of the photograph in the memory room, glowing under my touch, flashed through my mind. I shook my head. I'm not a miracle. I'm just me. Messy, broke, sarcastic me. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate. And yet you changed everything tonight. For them. For this place? His pause was long enough to sting. For me, I swallowed hard, heat prickling behind my eyes. So what now? Do you still plan to close it all down? His answer came without hesitation. No. If you are willing to stay, we continue. Together. The word lingered in the air. Together. I sat on the edge of the desk, my hands braced against the polished wood. Partners? Partners? He inclined his head, as if sealing a contract. But then his eyes softened, losing their edge. If you'll have me. I laughed quietly, though my voice broke on it. You make it sound like I'm hiring you. In a way, you are. A trace of irony colored his tone. I've run this place for decades, yet in weeks you've done what I could not. Perhaps it is I who works for you now. The warmth in my chest was almost unbearable. I shook my head, blinking fast. Don't say things like that unless you mean them. He was close enough now that I could see the faintest cracks in his composure. The way his shoulders had loosened, the quiet pull in his eyes. I do not waste words, Mara. We didn't touch. We didn't need to. The intimacy was in the space between us. The fragile trust rebuilt word by word, choice by choice. For the first time, I believed him. For the first time, I believed us. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the funeral hall, transforming the space in a way I'd never thought possible. The dark wood gleamed warmly. The lilies seemed brighter than they had any right to be, and the steady hum of conversation filled the air. Clients came and went. Some to leave tokens, others to visit ones already kept here. But the mood was different, lighter. It didn't feel like a place people came only to grieve. It felt like a place people came to remember. I stood by the entrance with a brush still stained on my fingers, watching, as a little girl tugged her grandmother toward one of the display shelves. She squealed when she saw the painting I'd hung above it, a small canvas of a garden in bloom, colors bright and playful. The grandmother smiled, her eyes misting over. but not with sorrow. With warmth. "Your work changes the room." Silvan's voice came from behind me. I turned. He was standing in the doorway, the morning light catching in his dark hair. The crisp edges of his suit hadn't changed, but something else had. His expression. He no longer looked like the immovable guardian of grief. He looked content. "Paint does what it can," I said, setting the brush aside. "The rest is up to the people who walk through that door. They stay," he said simply. "Because of you," I rolled my eyes, though a smile tugged at my lips. "Careful. If you keep complimenting me, people will think you're human." The faintest curve touched his mouth. Dangerous rumor. Later, when the bustle of the day eased, we slipped outside. The cemetery stretched out in quiet dignity, but under the sunlight it felt less like a place of endings, and more like a strange, peaceful garden. The grass glittered with dew, birds darted between leaning headstones, and the air smelled faintly of wet earth. We walked side by side down the familiar path. Our footsteps fell into rhythm without effort. "You realize," I said, breaking the silence. "If you take away the coffins, the grief, the occasional burst of supernatural horror, this entire setup looks suspiciously like a romantic sitcom." He glanced at me, brow lifting. "A sitcom?" "Yeah. Picture it. My demon boss runs a funeral home." Cue laugh track. A rare, startled sound left him. Half laugh, half incredulous scoff. "Ridiculous. Ridiculously accurate," I countered, grinning. "You, the stoic boss with a tragic secret. Me, the sarcastic assistant who's clearly too good for minimum wage. Add some quirky side characters, and we're a prime-time hit." His lips curved again, slower this time, deliberate. "You think we're amusing?" "I think we're alive," I said softly. We stopped near a stone angel, its face worn smooth by time. The sunlight pooled between us, warm and golden. He looked down at me, the weight of centuries in his gaze. But also something new, something fragile and human, given shape in the curve of his smile. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence didn't demand anything. It simply was, filled with the sound of wind in the trees and our own breathing. Then I nudged him with my shoulder. "Don't get used to me being sentimental. Tomorrow I'll go back to calling you the world's best-dressed antique." "Tomorrow," he agreed, the warmth in his tone making the word feel like a promise. We stood there a little longer, laughing softly at nothing in particular. The sunlight spilling over us like paint on a fresh canvas. For once, death didn't feel like the end of the story. It felt like the beginning of ours.